Good morning, everyone. This is a press conference with Ms. Oleksandra Matviichuk, and we're just going to wait one more minute to make sure that everyone who's attending has joined this call. So just please bear with us. So good morning again. My name is Emoke Babiak. I'm the head of communications at Right Livelihood, and it is my absolute honor to welcome Ms. Oleksandra Matviichuk. She and the organization she leads, the Center for Civil Liberties in the Ukraine, have been named among the 2022 Right Livelihood laureates. Just a couple hours ago, we made the announcement this morning. And with that, they are joining a community of change makers who are working on solving some of the most pressing problems around the world. And with today's announcement, we now have 190 laureates from 74 countries. Ms. Matviichuk will start with an opening statement, and then we will open up the floor for questions. So without further ado, Ms. Matviichuk, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a great honor for me to become a laureate and to join to the community of laureates of Right Livelihood Award. And because it's a privilege to be a part of community of people who fighting for freedom, for rule of law, for democracy, and for other human values. My name is Oleksandra Matviichuk. I'm a human rights lawyer. I'm head of Center for Civil Liberties. It's Ukrainian human rights organization. For 20 years, I have been defending human rights in Ukraine and OSCE region. And last 8 years, I have been documenting war crimes and try to help victims of the war crimes. And we, together with my team, work on two main directions. First, we try to help our country to provide democratic reforms in the rule of law field, and we involved in the reform of police, judiciary, security service, harmonization of our legislation with international standard of human rights, etc. And parallel, we documenting war crimes and try to bring perpetrators to justice. And every result which we achieved together with our team is only because we always rely on assistance and involvement of common people. And this is my main lessons learned from all my experience. 8 years ago, I, together with team, created Euromaidan SOS initiative during Revolution of Dignity. And we worked 24 hours a day to provide legal and other aid to persecuted protesters around the country. And every day, hundreds and hundreds of people who were beaten, who were arrested, who were accused and fabricated criminal or administrative charge, people who were tortured, relatives of abducted people, relatives of killed people, passed through our care. And on that months, it was very easy to lost their belief in law because the law didn't work at all. And because the whole state authoritarian machine of our previous president Yanukovych was against us. But because our volunteers and other people who supported us work and fight very honestly for each person, for each procedure's measures, we started to work not only on legal, but on symbolical level. And it led to result that everybody on Maidan know that there is no guarantee. You can be arrested, you can be beaten, you can be even killed, but there are people who will fight for you, who will never leave you alone. And this understanding provide a courage for people to overcome the fear and to continue our struggle against authoritarian regime for the rights to have a chance to live and build a country where judiciary is independent, the rights of everybody is protected, government is accountable, and police do not beat peaceful demonstrators. Returning to nowadays, we are on the 7th month of large-scale Russian invasion. And I will remind you that Putin started this war not in February 2022, but in February 2014, in response of collapse of authoritarian regime in Ukraine. Because Putin is not afraid of idea of NATO, Putin is afraid of idea of freedom. And he started this war in order to stop us on our way to democratic transformation. So we are fighting for a freedom in all senses, for a freedom to be independent state, for a freedom to be Ukrainians with our own language and culture, and for a freedom to have our democratic choice. And we are paying a rather high price for it. What do I mean? Only for 7 months of large-scale Russian aggression, jointly together with our partners of Tribunal for Putin Initiative, we have documented more than 19,000 episodes of war crimes. It's very different kinds of war crimes because Russian army intentionally liquidate residential buildings, churches, schools, hospitals. They committed different kinds of offenses against civilians, intentional murders, tortures, abductions, sexual violence, etc. They manage the system of filtration camps and provide forcible deportation of Ukrainians to their territory. And we're faced with enormous of pain of civilians because Russia used war crimes as a method of warfare and tried to break the resistance of people and occupied our country with a tool which I call the immense pain of civilian population. And now one of the main goals of us as a human rights defenders is to find a way how to hold war criminals accountable. And now we are not only provide documentation and assistance to war crime victims, but we try to elaborate a justice strategy to provide the chance for hundreds of thousands of victims of war crimes to achieve justice. I worked with people directly on the ground, and I know for sure that they need to restore not only their broken lives, broken health, broken families, broken vision of future, but their broken belief that justice is possible, even though delay in time. And now we are fighting in the law dimension of this war. And this is a value dimension, because Putin tried to convince Ukrainians and other nations in the world that freedom, democracy, and rule of law are the fake values because they couldn't protect anyone during the war. That's why we are promoting to creation the International Tribunal on War Crimes, Crimes Against Humanity, and Genocide in order to hold accountable the Russian top political and military leadership, as well as people who committed these crimes by their own hands. In such a way, we will win this value dimension. We will be able to say to Ukrainians and to the other peoples in the world that yes, it was a period of law disorder when law doesn't work, and I'm, as a human rights defender with 20 years experience of human rights protection, have no legal instrument how to stop atrocities, but it was temporary period, we fix it, and now we achieve a justice. Thank you. I am ready for your questions.
Thank you very much for that statement. We will now open up the floor for questions. There are two ways you can ask a question. One is to type it into the Q&A section, and the other one is to raise your hand and we will unmute you and you can ask your question. So as we are waiting for some questions to come in, maybe Oleksandra, if you could speak to the situation right now. There are news coming every day, but yeah, please describe the situation as it is right now.
I started my morning with a message to my colleagues in Dnipro, because this night Russian rockets hit that Dnipro is a town, it's a Ukrainian town, and news reported that there are injured and killed people after this night attack. And I texted to my colleagues and to friends to have information, are they alive? And this is how our days now looks like, and it's very difficult to get used to it. And we always tell that that war is something unhuman and unmoral, and I have never wished any nation to go through the war. But the only positive side, if I can say so, of this horrific situation is a huge wave of solidarity across the country. And we see that common Ukrainians start to do uncommon things, and they simply risk their life to defend each other, to help people, to provide assistance for those whom they have never met before. And this provides us other energy to continue our struggle, as well as international support and solidarity, which we received. So I will finish on that point that we are very grateful for all international support, because the challenge which we face couldn't be solved in national borders. And we need to unite efforts of democracies of the world in order to stop Putin, because if we will not be able to stop him in Ukraine, he will go further.
We have a question from David Grossman. We will now open your mic and you can ask it.
Okay, do you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Okay, thanks. You sound very optimistic in for getting all these people into an international tribunal in the future. How come you can sound so optimistic about that? Because we've seen before it's very hard to do that.
Can I clarify, optimistic about future in general or about justice issue?
Yeah, I mean about the justice issue. I mean, all these episodes of war crimes. You said 19,000 episodes of war crimes. You documented it, and you sound like you think you can get all these into international tribunals in the future. Do you think so? I mean, how can you sound so optimistic about that?
I'm not a person who can predict future. I am a person who, together with my colleague and other team in Ukraine, try to create a future which we want to achieve. And I know that all this horror which we now face in Ukraine is a result of total impunity which Russian troops enjoyed for decades, because Russian troops committed war crimes in Chechnya, in Georgia, in Moldova, in Syria, in Mali, in Libya, and they enjoyed impunity. They haven't even been punished for using chemical weapons against civilians in Syria. And this led to result that Russia started to think that they can do with people whatever they wanted. And I totally believe that we must break the circle of impunity. And I know that a lot of things first happen on the symbolical level and then implemented into the force. So we will try to do our best to convince international community that we need to stop these atrocities, not only for Ukrainian nation, but for the other nation as well. And here I see the question of Virginie Lenk, and she told about Nuremberg-style war crimes trial in Ukraine, and she asked me, are you expecting trial soon? What I want to comment, because it's very connected with previous question. In past century, the humankind made a huge step to ensure justice and law. And international community, the civilized world, create a Nuremberg tribunal and hold the war criminals of Nazi regime accountable. But they created this Nuremberg tribunal when the Nazi regime collapsed. Now we are living in a new century, and we must go further. We must to ensure that justice have not to be dependent on the magnitude of Putin's regime. We don't need to wait. We must establish this international tribunal for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide now.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Andreas Stange, and the question is, the UN and NGOs have occasionally also reported about war crimes committed not only by Russian troops and rebels. Have you any records of war crimes possibly committed by Ukrainian soldiers? If yes, how would you estimate the percentage of all reported war crimes?
We are human rights defenders, and I and my colleagues defended human rights regardless of the sites. And for all these 8 years, we documented not only crimes of Russian side, but if we found a crimes which is committed by Ukrainian soldiers, we have a possibility to open a criminal case and to push for effective investigation and in order to bring guilty people to accountability. Now in this war, we have a huge amount of Russian war crimes, and it's very difficult for me to speak with percentage, because even the pain of one single person is matter. But the vast majority of crimes which we are documented is committed by Russian soldiers, because it's a legitimate, like it's a policy of Russian leadership. I can give you an example. When I was circled by Russian troops more than 1.5 months, because I stayed in Kiev after the large-scale invasion. And I remember that time when we celebrate each morning because there is no Russian troops in my native town. And then when Russians retreat from Kiev region, we sent mobile groups to work on the ground and to spoke with people directly and gather testimonies and other kind of evidence. And not only we did so, there were plenty of international journalists and international organizations. That's why the world very quickly get known information about atrocities in Bucha, in Matviichuk, in Vorzel. They get known the stories when Russian tanks, just for fun, firing at people on the bicycle on the streets, whose bodies lay scattered around the streets until liberation. They got information about stories of sexual violence when Russian soldiers broke into someone's house, killed the owner and raped their wife and then her child, and other kind of horrible stories. And when the world was shocked by these stories, what did Putin do? Putin provided a medal for the armed unit who was in Bucha, just to show to the whole Russian army that they do the right things and they can continue do these atrocities.
Our next question comes from Virginie Lenk, and she's asking, are you in favor of a Nuremberg-style war crimes trial in Ukraine, and how will it work? Are you expecting trials soon?
I will just repeat myself that we are in new century, and Nuremberg trial was a court and a huge achievement of last century. In new century, we have a new historical goals. We haven't waited for the collapse of a regime which commit mass atrocities. We have to ensure justice now. And this is a historical responsibility of all civilized nations in the world. And this September, as it was the General Assembly session of UN in New York, and the initiative of Nobel Women supported our work. They presented in the session the film about struggle of women in Ukraine, and I was one of hero of this film. And they provided my open letter to Secretary General of UN about necessity to go further to establish international tribunal on war crimes, crimes against humanity and genocide, as well as a historical responsibility to start a complete reforming of UN system and withdraw Russia from the Security Council. So I'm still waiting for response from Secretary General of UN and other member states, because this open letter was addressed to them also.
And we have one more question from David Grossman. Ukraine has not joined the International Criminal Court. Why is that?
Our organization started advocacy campaign for ratification of Rome Statute immediately when authoritarian regime collapsed in 2014. For that time, we started this campaign in order to promote idea that we have to be guaranteed as a people, as a citizens of our country, that regardless of who will be in power, any power will have not to repeat these atrocities which we observed during Yanukovych time, when policemen gunning down peaceful protesters in the center of the Kiev. And then it became the huge campaign which resulted that Ukraine sent 2 single declarations to International Criminal Court. And that's why International Criminal Court, even regardless of those facts that Ukraine is still not a member, started the preliminary examination, and in 2nd of March, the full investigation of international crimes which is committed on Ukrainian territory. And all these years, we try to perceive Ukrainian authorities that we have to become a full member of International Criminal Court. And because we now in very strange situation, for one side, International Criminal Court have opened the investigation and work on the territory of Ukraine, and Ukraine has obligation to cooperate with ICC because Ukraine sent these 2 declarations with request for help. But on another side, we have no rights as full members of ICC has. And Ukrainian authorities respond us on that way, that this war have different kinds of dimensions, and one is informational dimension, and they afraid the fake campaign from Russian side that when Ukraine ratify Rome Statute, the ICC will not be able to catch Russians because Russia will never cooperate with ICC, and that's why they will catch only Ukrainians. For sure, it's a false and fake accusation. ICC is independent in their investigations, and nobody can influence. But still, we are not convinced Ukrainian authorities that it has to be priority for that moment. We will continue our work because we strongly believe that with joining to ICC, Ukraine sent the strong message to the civilized world that we will fight for impunity as a full member of the International Criminal Court. Also, I will mention that Ukraine has a problem with national legislation, and we still have no responsibility in our criminal court for crimes against humanity. And my organization developed the legislation which changed the criminal court. And after the lot of years of advocacy campaign, we managed that this legislation was adopted by Parliament of Ukraine, but still this law is not signed by President of Ukraine.
And we have a clarification question, whether, Oleksandra, you are in Ukraine or in Stockholm?
I'm in Kiev, in Ukraine. And I was here during the all time when large-scale invasion started. And I left Kiev only in middle of May for advocacy trip to several countries, where I met with top-level politicians, journalists, and analysts, and other people in order to discuss the justice problem issue and this accountability gap, which we observe for current moment, when national system is overloaded of the amount of crimes, and International Criminal Court will limit itself only to several selected cases. So we need to establish additional international mechanisms. And this was the goal of my advocacy trip.
We have another question from Virginie Lenk. Do you believe that Vladimir Putin could be one day prosecuted for war crimes? And how optimistic are you about that?
I have no doubt that he will. If he will survive till that day and not repeat Hitler's act, he will be in court. And maybe now it sounds very naive, but I know the history. A lot of authoritarian leaders of the world think themselves untouchable, but the history showed that authoritarian regime collapsed, and sooner or later their leaders appeared under the court trials.
Thank you. Do we have any more last questions? I don't see any. So thank you very much, Ms. Oleksandra Matviichuk, for joining us, even despite the difficult circumstances that you are in. And just as a reminder, if you would like the recording, please reach out to your contact at the foundation. We'll be happy to share it with you in the next couple of minutes. And also, if you have one-on-one interview requests, we are very happy to facilitate that. So with that, thank you very much for joining, and have a good day.
Thank you.